Ohio gozaimasu. Oh, that's loud. Ohio gozaimasu. Konnichiwa. Konbanwa. I say this good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever your body clock is on. I learned that. I took a trip to Tokyo this summer, so that was really cool and different. And so I like to greet people wherever I came from. And also, you get my vacation pictures, because it's always difficult, to find royalty-free pictures in the slides. So I just put my vacation pictures in there. So I hope you enjoy them. And I hope you're here for the correct session. This is 70-534, Architecting Azure Solutions. My name is Mark Grimes. If you've seen me before, it's probably in Microsoft Virtual Academy. I have delivered this. I delivered this at Microsoft Virtual Academy back in March. This is not exactly the same. So I always try to do a little bit of a refresh, even though the exams aren't refreshed as often as I do. I've decided not to be lazy, right? Because as presenters, we like to take the presentation we gave at the last Ignite and just kind of reuse it. Well, that doesn't do you any good, right? So every time I deliver this session now, I try to go through because I can't cover every little dot and point they have for the exam in 60 or 75 minutes. Is that timer up here? Oh, no timer. So what I do is each time I do this, I add some more. So I added about a dozen slides. So when you get the slide deck, which you will, I'll tell you where. It will, of course, be at my Ignite. I do copious blogs. I made a really, really simple one for all my certification stuff and all the Azure and Azure Stack learning, because I do that as well. But the thing you'll notice in these slides, they'll see slides and they'll see a little rotating diamond. I did that because back in the old days of MCT-ness, we used to call these things diamond slides, which were kind of key important slides. So if you see a diamond slide, that means it's never been shown before. It's a brand new slide I created. And not necessarily new content, but just trying to emphasize something different than what you might see on MVA. So why might you want to go to MVA? Well, of course, MVA, besides just being a great tool for all kind of learning, it's broken into small chunks, right? So you can watch 10 minutes at a time. In fact, when I was doing the recording, they're like, Mark, you went way too long, because I have a tendency to talk a lot. And, but they constrained me for each section to 10 minutes. So you can watch 10 minutes and it picks up where you left off, which is really, really cool. So real quick little spiel about this. I tell everyone this, and this is about, I don't know, the 14th or 15th time I've delivered this. I've delivering this ever since the exam came out. I do it internally at Microsoft twice a year. I do it at Ignite. I do it at MVA. I do it all over the place. This exam literally changed my career path. So whether you believe in certification or not, I think it's worth the investment in time to get a base level learning knowledge. So I was delivering Windows Server 2012 certifications 3 years ago. This was coming out in beta. No one was raising their hand, so I raised my hand. I'm like, I want to learn about the cloud. I want to get into it. So I started doing it and started teaching it, started learning more. And then an opportunity inside of Microsoft came up in the Azure Center of Excellence. I'm an identity guy. They needed an identity guy. And I was already learning Azure. So I joined that. From that point on, I was only allowed to touch Azure projects. So for the past 3 years, I have done nothing but touch Azure. So, it doesn't mean I know everything. As we know it's a huge, huge, huge field. There's so much to learn. But doing that and making that conscious decision has changed my career path. And now I'm even going into bleeding edge, which my friend Scott loves, Azure Stack he's going to implement, right? So, all right. So quick little tidbits about myself I would like to share. Those in the United States know this is the only state you can do this. I live in the state of Michigan, down here in southeast Michigan. You never say you're from Detroit, although it's coming back. It's called the comeback city now. It's really nice down there. You should check it out. I have a beautiful wife, 3 kids, and a very white fluffy dog. If you've ever seen a Samoyed, they're great. I'm kind of an MCT retired status, but I've been an MCT for over 2 decades. So I was certified in 1997, and I actually spent 10 years of my life, day in, day out, doing nothing but this, 8 hours a day. Imagine every single day of your life you get evaluated. That's what it's like being an MCT full time. I just celebrated 7 years at Microsoft, and the first 4 years I lived and breathed identity, particularly ADFS Federation. Did a little dabble in FIM, but I'm really an ADFS kind of guy. And of course that leads itself into Azure because of identity and synchronization and federation, Azure Active Directory. Before that, I spent 5 years with a Microsoft Gold partner, so Jetting Capgemini, doing lots of projects. And actually, the very last project I did was leveraging stuff before we had ADFS 2.0, doing BitQ and some virtual directory services. Inside of Microsoft, we have incredible technical communities. I run the worldwide identity community. It doesn't make me the sharpest pencil in the box, but I know all the sharp pencils. So that's a really great feature of the communities we have. I'm also a very avid blogger. I have 2 ways you can find my blog site. It's very simple, my name, aka.ms. If you didn't know, that's the Microsoft shortcuts, also known as Microsoft. aka.ms/Mark Grimes, or affectionately known as aka.ms/I'm allergic to code. I am truly an infrastructure person. So at Mark B. Grimes, someone beat me to Mark Grimes, but that's my Twitter handle. Just before this class, I posted a blog post about this class, or this session, and I just posted it on Twitter. So I'll give you that link in a second. Q&A, we will not have time for it. So when we get done, the point is I have 73 slides in about probably 65 minutes now. The idea here is to deliver content, get you ready to take the exam. I will take questions afterward. You can post to me. My email is very simple. It's, if you don't know this secret at Microsoft, it's first.lastname@microsoft.com. So you can find anyone that way. So the way I build these slide decks, and this is the way you should prepare for any exam. First of all, you have to know the exam objectives. I made that super simple for you for all 3 exams. Anyone, they've been here all morning, so this is their 3rd one. Okay. So I've made a shortcut for all 3 exams, aka.ms/70-532/70-533 or 70-534, aka.ms. Just put the exam number and boom, you're there. That's the exam objectives. So the way I built this deck, the last session you saw, I built that deck. He borrowed it from me because I had it well done. The way I build it is I look at the exam objectives and I go through each section categorically, and then I try to break down and get as much relevant content as possible. Trying to focus on some things that may not be so obvious to you. Because if you've ever taken a server exam, it's like, I did server day in, day out, but I didn't know everything you needed to know or didn't care to know about DNS, but it might be in the exam, right? There's exam world and real world, right? So that's the thing we have to differentiate. I want to give you some real world stuff too because, we're IT professionals. That's always good. But you got to know the exam requirements first. You take that. I broke down the deck. Then I fill in the content. Those that know me in this because I got a few customers here, I do a lot of shortcuts. So aka.ms/Azure/whatever, /VPN/network/security/ you can almost guess them. In fact, like every time I go to make a new one, it says, oh, Mark Grimes already owns it. So I have over 1,000 of those. So throughout the deck, what I've done is when I've found the content to create the slide, I went to the page that's kind of like the biggest bang for the buck about that topic, and I made an aka.ms/Azure/ thing for it. So you'll see that. So this deck is your study resource. So I've taken those, put those in the slides, and included that throughout the decks. So the final takeaway is to hope you pass the exam. Here's the bottom line, folks. Most people that take exams will miss it by 3 to 5 questions that I've seen. My goal is if I can get you 3 to 5 questions, I've done my job. So I'm going to just tip you over a little bit, right? Now, a good friend of mine, and he's just like you, he's very smart, and he was the greatest sales pitch ever, but he told me a year ago, he sat in my session, had never touched Azure. He did what I told him to do. He used the links, studied about 2 days straight, and he passed the exam. That doesn't mean you all can do that too. But let me give you the expectation. So a lot of people go, how much effort does it take? If he was extreme, rare case, right? But if you've never touched Azure, never been into it, your level of effort, you should expect to spend 40 to 80 hours of effort. If you're kind of like I was when I started, I dabbled, I built some subscriptions, done some VMs, but not a little bit of everything, 20 to 40 hours, right? If you're living, breathing, doing it all the time, day in, day out, probably 10 to 20 hours, maybe even less. But there's going to be those topics, those things that you didn't know that you want to find the deltas. That's what's really important. So this deck is your study tool, and a couple things that are really, really important. I've done a lot of animations, so if you can't get in the portal, guess what? I've taken screenshots for you. And some of these walk through. You look and see what all the settings are, what all the options are. I passed an IIS exam by simply clicking through the interface and reading and looking at everything on there. Never read a book on it. And that's why I passed the IIS exam. What good that's for, I don't know. But it was IIS 5.0. So if you don't watch this screen in full screen view, there's going to be pictures that are going to be hiding text and be hiding in other pictures. So make sure you go in full screen. Very important. If you didn't know a little trick, F5 will put you in slideshow mode. And also, by doing that, you can then just click on the links, because in full screen mode, they'll work without having to hold the control. So I'm trying to kind of collect all my goodness, all the Ignite sessions, all the MVA sessions, all the certification, one easy to remember URL. This is all you need right here, folks. So aka.ms/azure/learn. If you forget that, I made /certification also. Okay. And so, the other important part about that is, as soon as I'm done with this session, I will go to that blog post and I will upload this deck so you'll have it faster than it will be at the Ignite. Okay? So that's my little present to you. Got to give you a little bit of the Cert thing. So if you've been here the last two sessions, I apologize, I have to repeat some of this, but they want to make sure you understand. So the certifications are evolving now to be more cloud-focused. So it's been an evolution, and they've expanded quite a bit in the last couple of years. Updating is, I'll say, between you and me and the recording, it's still a challenge, but they're doing better than they used to do. So the last time this was updated was last November. The current word is going forward this October. It's going to change again. I don't think it will be as radical a change because last time we went from ASM, Azure Service Manager, which means the old portal, to the new portal for ARM, Azure Resource Manager. So this exam has a lot of content on Azure Resource Manager. So what my guess would be the next updates will be, okay, now we got rid of everything in the old portal, right? Because everything's now in the new portal. And you all saw that announcement? They're going to retire the old portal. Yay, finally. I was like, it's about time. But they finally have moved everything over. So October is the next update. So I would highly suggest, I tell people, go take the exam whether you're ready or not, because I can't tell you a single question that's on that exam. I would lose my certification, which I've worked for 20 years for. But if you take the exam and you don't pass, you now know what you don't know. And you can use that to your advantage to study. Most exams, so I made another shortcut link, very simple, and it's on my blog, Azure/Learn. Azure/Azure certifications, that takes you out to Microsoft Learning, which has all the options, and there's a lot more than I'm going to show you here, but most of your questions have 40 to 60 questions in the exams. This exam is a little bit different than like the infrastructure. So the last session, if you were here, the infrastructure exam will be 40 to 60 questions, pretty much straight in a line. If you're old school like me, so I was certified in NT 4.0, 2000, 2003, and MCSE, design exams where you had the case studies, same thing here. This is 3 to 4 case studies. When you're in each case study, once you're done, it closes out and you cannot go back. Okay, so you got to get that right. You can review questions, you can mark them. There can be all different types of questions. So there's sample things on the Microsoft Learn. If you've never taken an exam before, you probably want to do one of those little trial things to see what types of questions. But some of them are just, check A, B, C, D. Some are more than one. Some are the best answer. Some are drag and drop. Some are circle a thing on a picture. There's all sorts of things. 700's passing. Okay. So MCSA, Microsoft Certified Solution Associate. So the idea here is you're not planning, designing, you're more implementing, you know the how-to. That's the emphasis of this. So it just requires passing 2 exams, and then only 1 more exam to reach the MCSE, the new type they have. And I'm not going to read all these. These are all out there at that aka.ms/Azure certifications. But this is particularly related to this. There is a cloud platform and infrastructure path. So if you look over here, we'll zoom in for you. So we have the MCSE. And then so from that, you get this pool of exams that you can choose from. You see the 532, 533, 534, all there. Plus, there's a whole bunch more. So one that's going to be coming up, so I'm actually going to be working on this, and I'm guessing by the next time we have Ignite, it will be available. Some of you may have heard there were a few sessions here on Azure Stack. Those are under development now, and I will probably be delivering those as well. And I would imagine that may even have its own little separate path, but may be integrated into an MCSE. So stay tuned for that, and I'll be blogging on that. And this, I just did kind of a snapshot of the aka.ms/Azure certifications, multiple paths, but really in here, we're focused on the cloud platform as it relates to 70-534. There actually is a course. So I love partners. I love to offer a course, but I tell people, I think, having been in the business for a long time, I think there's plenty of content out there. Some people prefer to have a sit down and have an instructor drive them through that. If you think you need that, go for it. But my advice would be, I think you can probably do it without, as long as you have an Azure subscription or a trial subscription, and do a lot of the things that I tell you and recommend. You can pass this. So some other quick tips here on what to buy. So everything's out there. I'm going to have shortcuts in each of these slides going through. There's hands-on workshops. At the end of the deck, we're supposed to put, all the virtual labs. You know what I said? Anything that says Azure on it, right? It doesn't matter, because when you go to those labs, you don't have to do what's in the lab, right? If you got an Azure portal, just go in and do whatever it is. You want to make some web apps? Make some web apps. You want to do virtual machines? Go play with some virtual machines. Just get in the interface and try some things. Now, I caught a little bit of Brian's advice. He was giving some things about doing the prax exams. He gives some good ideas. I'm going to give you a little different twist on it, because my time is very valuable and I don't have a lot of time. Here's, well, actually, there's two points to this. One is, so on this exam where we have the case studies, I don't read the case studies. So what I do is I go right to the questions, because most of the time I can answer probably half those questions without ever having read that case study, because the other answers are just stupid. They're just, it couldn't have been that about networks when we're talking about storage. Why would I have that? So you can usually limit down. But now once I've looked at the questions, now, see what he was saying is scan through first. If I look at the questions, now I know what to go scan for. So do the questions first, knock out the ones you got, and then flip back, okay, and then in your little white paper you got to write down, okay, there was a question on storage and there was a question on express route, and now I'm going to scan through and look for those things. I think that's a little bit more efficient. Likewise, if you take prax exams, which they have prax exams here, take advantage of those. If you're doing a prax exam, I do the same thing. I click Start, I select them all, and I click End. And then I go through, and I look at, it's not just the right answers, I look at all the wrong answers. Because that's where I'm going to learn. That's where I'm going to eliminate. Because usually when you go through most of these questions, you can eliminate half of them. It's when you're down those final two. Because I don't know if you've ever seen that. They're usually done in pairs. It's like there'll be two things, they're kind of similar, and then they flip them around. And so you know that you're going to eliminate two, but then I'm stuck with the other two, and I'm going, I don't know which one. So you got to figure that out. One other thing I've taught people for a long time. So you're not allowed to bring in your cell phone. You're not allowed to bring anything written down. But as soon as you sit down, before you click Start, you got a blank white piece of paper. You can do a brain dump galore. So, for those of us in college, it's simple little, remember, all people seem to need data processing. That's still how I remember the layer 7, because I did that for an exam, right? It's never left me in 20 years. So I wrote that down on a thing. Oh, binary, 00001, 00011. There's always a subnet question. You're always going to get one subnetting question. I'll teach you how to do that with your fingers. But anyways, if you get these little rules of thumb, these stupid mnemonics, dump it in the paper so you don't have to think about it. And also, any question you mark, use that paper to just do a little mental note, because once you're out of the case studies and you're going through the multiple series of questions, sometimes a question later on will trigger a thought to help you answer the previous question. So I tell people this, I got new hires I'm advising all the time and taking these exams, get through it as quick as possible, answer what you know, and that way you don't, just go ahead, move on, and then come back to the ones you marked, and then check out your notes. Okay, but create a little cheat sheet at home, use that to practice, and then dump it and write it as soon as you start. All right. We don't have a timer up here. I need a timer. So here's our exam objective. What time's the end time, official end time for this? 1:45? Okay, I just want to keep a track here. 1:45 or 1:40? 1:45, okay. So 6 or 7 things. So we're going to talk about designing Azure Resource Manager networking, securing resources, designing application storage and data access strategy, designing an advanced application, Azure web and mobile apps, which really is all taught around app services. A couple of slides on designing management, monitoring, and business continuity strategy, and also architecting an Azure compute infrastructure. And actually, I think that last one, I think I changed that because it's actually more about ARM type stuff and role-based access control. Okay, so this is just, hope you like the picture. That was a waterfall in Japan. These are the basic categories we're going to talk about in Azure Resource Manager 4000. Okay, so diamond slide. So I haven't had this before. I recreated this. So IP addressing. We have two types, obviously. We got public IP addresses. We have private IP addresses. One of the new things, if you haven't been in lately, is unlike the past, in the old ASM, the old manage.windowsazure.com, where the IP address was bundled in a cloud service, now we actually have an object. So what's great about that, since we have an Azure object, you can do all this ARM goodness. What's that mean? Oh, I can put policies on it. I can put RBAC, role-based access controls on it. I can put tags on it. So it's a separate IP object. Where do we put these? We can put them on virtual machines, ILBs, which is an Azure load balancer. We can put it on VPMs, gateways. And for both public and private, we can use dynamic or static addressing if we want. And also, just note, so I do these always at the bottom. So you see Azure/addresses takes you to that page. So that's your study guide. I did this, and I want to be careful because the exam objective has not been updated. So I tried to, in this graphic here, highlight things that I thought were relevant, and some things are newer because it was new to me when I looked at it. So just pointing out here, you can actually select IP version 4 or 6. I don't know if the exam will cover that it can be IP6 or not, but that was a new switch. There's the option for dynamic or static. You can put a host name, DNS label in there if you want. And then you can also, anything you create, since it's an Azure resource, has to be in a resource group as well. Okay. So on contract, so the thing I show on the right here, we're going to give you a little ARM goodness, is we'll talk about built-in roles. So what I did here was actually zoomed in and kind of drilled down to show how granular you can get. So if I didn't want to give someone network contributor rights and I just wanted them to control and access and own the IP addresses, I can make a custom RBAC rule for read, get public IP address, and write, but not delete, and join public IP address. I can make a custom role for that. Very, very cool with Azure Resource Manager. So again, for private IP, we can put them on VMs, Azure load balancers, gateways, and again, they can be dynamic or static. DNS is an evolving story. I think there was a session here. There's some new stuff. Again, it's not being the exam yet. But essentially, Azure DNS is not a domain registrar, but you can delegate a zone to there. So just need to know what we can do and what we can create. You don't need the how-to. The how-to is the other exam. Azure. This is all planning design, right? This is an architecture. It's planning design. Now, sometimes in those like 20 or 30 questions in the middle of the case studies, they will get a little granular sometimes, but generally it's plan and design when you're reading these case studies. So again, if we create a zone name, it's got to be unique within the resource group. You always need to know that about uniqueness. There's only a couple things out there. Can anyone tell me anything that they know of that's pretty obvious of naming that has to be globally unique around the world? Storage. Thank you. Storage. Right, that's the first one that comes up. Storage. You create the DNS, it supports all common records, and actually what I did here is just made kind of a graphic so you can take a look at it right there. So this was, so when I'm in here on the blade, I can see all the things that I can do even on, whoops, sorry. So we have activity logs, we have the IAM, which we have on every Azure resource for access control, which that translates to role-based access control. We can do tags, we can do properties, we can do Azure Resource Manager locks. What are the two types of locks? Anyone tell me? Two types of locks. Do not delete, like accidental deletion, and read-only. Yep. So you should know those. We can do automation scripts, right? We can grab the ARM template from everything now. It's beautiful. So all the basic types, NS, SOA, A, Quad A. You make all those types of records. MX records as well. TXT. Which TXT you should know about, because one of the things you should know how to do on any of these 3 exams, if you've never done it before, I recommend to do it, and that is where you start off with markgrimes.onmicrosoft.com, and then I register markgrimes.com. You should know that process, how to do that, where you have to enter in a TXT record in the DNS, right, and then make them connected. So that's one of those things that always comes up on the exams, all 3 of them. categorically speaking. No specific question. So another topic here, NSGs or Network Security Group. These used to be called ACLs, but it's our access control list. Know where we apply these. We can apply it at the subnet or the network interface card. What's a design best practice? I like to do it at the subnet. That way, when we add in new VMs, it happens automatically. I invented that word. So I don't have to do it. Some people are really hyper security conscious, and they want to do that at each, constrain that at each and every VM. If you do it, it's more management, right? Maybe more security, but it's more management. Network security groups are only done it for TCP or UDP. Here's a special address. We'll zoom in here for you. And can anyone tell me what that 168.63.129.16 that Microsoft owns is used for? What was it? Nope. Was it for the callbacks to see what your system? Nope. Yeah, who's that? Yeah, bing, bing, bing. Health checks for load balancers. So we reserve that for all load balancer health checks. The port 1688 is reserved for key management services. So these are things that also in the real world to be aware of. You don't want to block these because then you block those things as well. Okay, and a shortcut for you. And you see on the right-hand side, so again, looking at the things I can do, not needing to be worried so much about how to do it, but can I do these things? So I have inbound security rules, outbound security rules, subnets that I apply it to, locks. I do diagnostics and logs on there. Okay. Kind of a flip side of this is another thing that we do, our user-defined routes. They finally changed it in the interface. It's called route tables now, because that's all it is. It's an update to your route table. You should understand that there's some built-in system routes that exist by default. So essentially, to keep it real simple, if you start with a big VNet and then you carve out subnets within that, the system routes pretty much says anything within that VNet can talk to anything else, right? But you may not want that, right? We may have multi-tiered applications within that VNet, and they're tiered, and we want to direct the path how they go. That's what a UDR is used for. It's outbound only. NSG is inbound or outbound. UDR is outbound. So you're kind of going from the bottom of the stack up the top, and maybe up to a typical use case. Why we do these? Network virtual appliance, right? We want all the traffic to go through a checkpoint firewall. So we're going to direct it with that UDR. Or extreme cases, I haven't heard a lot of customers, but we have some customers hyper security conscious. They're going to route back on premises. Yep, so they want to fork everything back through all their security equipment. So they do force tunneling back on there. Okay. So 3 default rules, the local VNet, to on-premises, and in the internet. Those are all there. And we gave you the examples. Really important point. I need my pen here, but if there's one thing I would want to know from a design architecture perspective is the order of preference. Why is it not going there? There we go. So there's a hierarchy about how the rules are applied. So number 1 is if you have UDR, that route wins. That's first. Number 2 is BGP. So if you have express route, then that wins. And then finally, if you don't have a UDR and you don't have BGP, then the system routes preside. So really, really important. This one link at the bottom, I think, is both excellent for the real world and the exam world. I tell people about this all the time. So this ak.ms/azure/DMZ, it literally is a flowchart walkthrough about you have this scenario, do this. You have this scenario, do that. It's all about structuring your DMZ and everything. It's a beautiful article. It's, to me, my go-to thing whenever we're talking about networking. And again, just kind of little animations here, so showing where we have a security subnet at the top, we have some back-end and a front-end subnet, and we have, so the red arrows are pointing up to the security network where the UDR is overriding that system route in this case. Okay. Azure load balancer, so some basic components. What we're looking for from an architectural design perspective is what are the best practices. Whenever I use an Azure load balancer, I want to have availability sets. So load balancers, availability sets go together, right? So what is a load balancer, or what's an availability set by me? Why do I care about availability sets? Yeah, so you got fault domains. Essentially, it's a big old rack, right? And if that rack goes down and all my 3 front-end web servers in there, I'm down, right? So we want to distribute across that. So very, very important that if you're going to do load balancing, you want to have an availability set as well. Not in the exam, but a good session you want to check out is the help me out, Scott. Yeah, you know, talk about the regions. So we were just talking about. Yeah, the parent. Yeah, so there was a good session on that, but it's beyond what this is talking about here. So we talked about availability set required. There's two different distribution modes, hash or stickiness or source IP. The thing to note about the hash or stickiness, it's per session. So if you close that session and then go again, it's going to then tie to where it came from. So it's per session based on TCP. Also very good and widely used for SQL AOA, availability, always on availability sets. There's a template out there to build that for you. You can grab it from the marketplace. And if you want to go another layer, and oh yeah, so I got a picture here. This really shows it well. So this is the big picture. And so we go, okay, that's really good. I'm going to load balance in my data center. But you know, we're in China, and we're in US, and we're in Africa. We need geographic load balancing, right? So that's where Traffic Manager comes in. Okay, for those of you in the other world, yeah, it's around 53, yeah, that kind of thing. So we want Traffic Manager to do this. Now, the cool thing that they don't show in this picture is Traffic Manager has profiles that you create. The profiles, you can base it on things like distribution by load, by performance, right? Failover, there's a failover mode. But there's also you can do nested profiles. So I could say load balance from US to Europe and to APJ, but if you hit APJ, then load balance between Japan and China. And that's another profile. So it goes to APJ first, Asia Pacific, Japan, and then based on their location, it will then, so you can have like Traffic Manager and then another Traffic Manager underneath that. And then what else you see here, so beneath the Traffic Manager for layer 7, SSL termination, you have application gateway, and then you have the load balancers beneath that. So that's kind of the hierarchy of a design, the way that would all work. Oops, what happened? Okay, speaking of application gateway, so I jumped in a little bit ahead there. So layer 7 load balancing, SSL termination. This is where you get your WAF, your web application firewall. It's internet facing, internal, or both. It works with VMs and cloud services. And again, so I took a little screenshot to show you configuration options and what we can get. So with the app gateway, you either select standard or you select the Windows application firewall. You can select your instance count in there. It's got to go into a resource group. And I highlighted this here. Your virtual network and public IP address must be in the same location as your gateway. If you plan on using existing resources, ensure you select the correct location. Okay.
I think you can't have anything else in that gateway.
No, right, it's got to be unique, yeah. The other thing you should know about, so when you think about how these exams work from these case studies, they're going to give you some information. And that information is going to determine what do I use? What do I select from this palette of options they give me in those checkboxes? So what does WAF do? What does it protect me from? From vulnerabilities, attacks, supports up to 20 websites behind a single gateway, monitoring using real-time report generated by gateway WAF logs. So they always talk about, I always forget the name of the acronym, but it's OWASP, O-W-A-S-P. They're kind of like known vulnerabilities like SQL injection and sorts of things like that. So I don't know if they'd throw that in there, but if you see OWASP, the answer is WAF. Expressway, so express route, I put the two together there. Express route. So when you're creating a virtual gateway, network gateway, come on, click. You see here, there's two types. So I can select VPN, or I can select express route. And then I can select a route-based or a policy-based on here. So with a VPN, if we use that, that's, of course, across public connection or Microsoft. You only get one of those per VNet. With ExpressRoute, there's various SKUs. There's now ExpressRoute Global or Premium, and the Premium gets you the global access around the world. A lot of people have to have that. If you're VPN, so again, kind of an exam architectural design decision is it secure? You know, CIO says high security is really important, and we need to have an IKE tunnel. Oh yeah, we got that with the VPN. We can take care of that, right? So we have IKE tunnels, V1 or V2. So if those are requirements that they list. VNet peering, if you're not familiar with that, that's kind of a new option. It's a lot easier. There is an exception, which some people have found out about, that does not work. You need to be aware of this. I don't know that it would come up in the exam, but it's a real-world thing. And this is going to change. This is a real-world tip. So currently, there's a limitation that the VNet peering has to be within the same region, right? And they're going to expand that. They probably talked about it here somewhere that they're going to expand. Yeah, they're going to expand it across regions. So, but as far as the exam goes, it's only one region because it hasn't been updated yet, right? Just saying. All right. So other types of VPNs we can do. So you got your point-to-point. We've got site-to-site. Point-to-point would really only be this laptop needs to go directly to Azure. He can do a point-to-point connection, but I can do a site-to-site. You can also combine a site-to-site with ExpressRoute as a backup, right? But also note that ExpressRoute has backup fault tolerance redundancy built into it with 2 circuits. But they were talking about in the session this morning I went to an ExpressRoute. Yeah, you can still have another redundant path if you want, and it will work with it. Time check here. Hey, speaking of ExpressRoute right there. So this story is changing also for the exam. This picture is good. Does anyone know what's changed? Did anyone go to that session this morning? You did, yeah. What's changing here?
The middle's going away.
Yeah, so what they're doing is they're going to merge these two together. So it's just going to be private and public. We've had 3 types of peering, which is traffic to kind of our cloud services, which is the orange line, then traffic to public IP addresses, so that's all the kind of Azure, PaaS type services, and then traffic to virtual networks. So the real world only, they're going to trim those down. Exam-wise, until they update it in October, you have 3 different types of pipelines there. It's layer 3 connectivity. It uses BGP, has an SLA associated with it, and quality of service. Redundancies we talked about, 2 BGP circuits per Microsoft Edge router. And I would know also the different types of connectivity. So we have these here. So you can choose to be co-located with a cloud exchange. So like Equinix, they do that. We've done that with a lot of customers. You can also connect point-to-point through an Ethernet connection. And then there's also any-to-any IPN VPN connections. Okay. And again, shortcut for you there, Azure/ExpressRoute to read more. Okay. So this is the Hawaiian god of Huma Nuku Nuku Apu identity. That's the identity god in Hawaii there. So I put him there for good luck. All right, so this is just a pretty picture. You got to have some pretty pictures in there, but Azure AD is the control plane. It's the identity control plane. The idea from a plan design architecture perspective is you want continuity going from on-premises into the cloud, right? It's one common identity, whether it's federated or synchronized. We use this for authentication, authorization, identity, and access management. Okay. Now, a new slide I made, which I had always had in there, and they need a web page on this. I'm going to talk to the product group. So I may get this blessed by them and update it. So when the exam objective says, what's the difference between Active Directory and Azure Active Directory? I have this conversation with customers all the time. They're like, oh, it's just Active Directory in the cloud. I'm like, no. They both do one thing in common, authentication, authorization, and the buck stops there, right? So we have that at the top, so that's the common, that's kind of the purpose. The directory structure is entirely different. Active Directory is hierarchical based on X.500. Azure Active Directory is flat, 80 LDS. You didn't hear that from me? It's basically like Atom, the old Atom. It's very, very flat. But that allows it to scale. Delegation model. So in Active Directory, and we have forests, we have domains, we have organizational units. The purpose of OUs is only 2 things, to delegate administration and to add GPOs. Well, we don't have those in Azure AD. We don't have GPOs, but we can do delegation. How do I do delegation? I can do it through role-based access control. Now, one thing is important. This is a question that have come up to people, and this is something real world and maybe at exam world as well that people get wrong. So anyone tell me in an Active Directory world, what's the security boundary? Nope. The forest. The forest is the security boundary in Active Directory. And a lot of people say in Azure, the subscription is, and that's wrong. The security boundary is Azure Active Directory. You can make an argument if I only got one Azure AD and one subscription, it's kind of the same thing, but the security boundary is Azure Active Directory tenant. So when you get it, yeah, the tenant, and I use that word very specifically. A tenant is an instance of Azure Active Directory. Can I have multiple? Yes, but you can only have one primary, right, per subscription. You could have 3 subscriptions, dev, test, prod, and have 3 different tenants, dev, test, prod, tied and synchronized and federated with 3 forests, dev, test, prod, right? Or you could have dev, test, prod subscriptions all tied to one common Azure AD, synchronized and federated to one markgrimes.com, right? Different design patterns. Authentication, Active Directory uses Kerberos. Azure Active Directory, you use SAML, WSFed, and OAuth. You get OAuth tokens. You don't get Kerberos tickets in Active Directory. How do we query it? AD, use LDP tool, that kind of stuff, LDAP. We use Graph API. Graph API does CRUD operations, create, rate, update, delete. You can do queries, complex queries, builds, joins, all kind of stuff with Graph API. Talked about the structure, we talked about GPOs. A couple other things, these are kind of some newer slides. I think since the last Ignite, I may have briefly touched upon it, but you don't need to be an expert in this exam. You just need to know if I have a scenario and some design choices, which of these things will fit that. Well, B2C and B2B are pretty straightforward from that perspective, from the exam world. Implementation is a little bit different, but B2C is for consumers. This is the social identity providers. So we want to have Google, Facebook login, Microsoft IDs, that sort of thing. So we can use those. Seamless user experience, so what that means is if I got a tablet or I got a phone, it has that kind of auto-shrinking design thing. I forget what they call that in the app dev world. So it will work across all platforms. We support MFA, right? So, probably heard we acquired Phone Factor quite a while ago, but we use it internally at Microsoft. I'm not allowed to use passwords. If I do, I'm forced MFA. And there's a whole session here on no more passwords. That's our direction we're going to at Microsoft, and you should too. Protocol support, OIDC, which is OpenID Connect, and OAuth 2, and we talked about the Azure AD Graph API. Here's an important design thing. Question, true or false? I have an Azure Active Directory tenant. Can I flip a switch, use PowerShell, Graph API, or something to make it B2C? True or false? Well, you're not too confident there. It's false, right? It's a whole separate tenant. So you need to be aware of that if you weren't. I can't just go, okay, I got my tenant, and I just want to flip the switch and make it do B2C. No, you're making another separate tenant for B2C. Very important. This link, I apologize, I caught it right before I came in. Obviously, it should be Azure/B2B, right? A little typo there, so make sure you catch that. This was from last Ignite. So Arvind, one of the product group managers, he did this. And this is, so B2B is, if you think about an Active Directory world, we got forest to forest, right? We make a trust between them, right, to share resources. Think of that as the same parallel to the cloud, right? You have a tenant, I have a tenant, you have a subscription tied to it, I have one, and we want to share resources. So we do B2B collaboration, okay? But sometimes, maybe we want to do collaboration, but I start with Jay. And Jay from, can I say your company name? NEA, it turns out NEA doesn't actually have a cloud. But he registers to communicate with me and my company, and what happens is a viral tenant gets fired up. But then later on, Mike, who's his boss, goes, Jay, we own that domain. I need to get it back. So there's this whole process that you can get your tenant back. So that's what Arvind was walking through. So it says Arvind can choose to not create an account if the invitation, there's an invitation that gets sent out. So there's this tenant domain. There's an email verification. So what happens is, what was the name, Mike? So Mike could actually come back and say, I can prove that I own this and verify it, and then he can take over that, and that viral tenant then will become his. And then he can tie that to a subscription. So I'm not going to read through this, but I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Are you going to be working with social identity providers and consumers, or you need to share resources between organizations, B2C versus B2B? Pretty straightforward. I could talk about this for hours. 4 years of my life here. So federation. So we have two options. I had another slide. Ed may have shown it, because I think I had it in my other deck, where it kind of shows the picture of federation and synchronization, all that sort of stuff. Here's what I tell people. There's two types of SSO. I don't know if you realized. There's federation SSO and there's identity synchronization SSO. If we're synchronizing, it's same sign-on. If I'm doing federation, it's single sign-on, true authentication back to the source. So if I'm doing ADFS, which can use Active Directory as its authentication provider, even though I'm logging into the cloud, I go back to Active Directory and authenticate my credentials there. Right? That's true single sign-on. And of course, if you're inside at work, it's even easier because he just logged in right now to try it out. And as he logged into his laptop, he was already in the domain. And so, boop, he goes right through. Right? That's what true single sign-on does. If you do same sign-on with synchronization, You're going to put the same username and password, but and this very important point, real world and exam world, the passwords are never stored in the cloud. I know you've heard that, right? It's not even the hash. So you can't do a PTH attack to pass the hash attack. It's a hash of the hash, right? I keep telling people, it's not the hash. You don't have to worry about it. Okay, so key things real quick to know about federation. So first of all, in the past, we used to have what was called an ADFS proxy. That's been long gone, although the service still lives as a service in web application proxy. So typically by design, from an architectural perspective, you want to have a pair of each, a pair of web application proxy servers fronting in an ILB, a load balancer, in an availability set, right, in its own subnet, right, and then you're going to have beneath that a pair of ADFS servers in an availability set, in a load balancer with a UDR pointing up to the web application proxy subnet, right, to direct that traffic so it can't talk to all the other servers, right? So this is how you tie all these concepts together. You should know some basic concepts that we have rules. So federation is based on a trust system. It's exchange of certificates. We have IDPs, identity providers, and you have relying parties, which are the applications. The identity provider is like Active Directory. This exam may also include, I'm just going to throw it out there just in case. So typically in the past, on Server 2012, ADFS could only have AD as an authentication provider. In 2016, you can do any LDAP server. So don't know if that's included, but if they talk about 2016 on the exam, LDAP is an option to authenticate against. And that solved a lot of problems. I used to have to use virtual directory services like Radiant Logic and Optimal IDM to solve that problem before, but now we cover it. Let's see what else. So that's the basics. Again, you'll have to be an ADFS expert. So Azure Disk Encryption, this is a new slide, just some basic things. So the value proposition is it works across both Windows and Linux. For Windows, of course, we use BitLocker. For Linux, it's going to use the dmcrypt. We have Key Vault integration to make it seamless, where we store all those secrets in the Key Vault. In the Key Vault, I think this happened before the last refresh. So it's actually called, so there's actually a Azure Recovery Vault. I think that's what it's called, where it can store those keys in there in Azure. The whole point of this is, of course, that ensures data at rest is encryption, and also we get auditing tied with it. Azure Security Center, what I'm going to tell you is, if you've never gone in, tried it, flipped it, do it. You should be running this in your organizations. It's just really great. But you want to see what things you can do. So what sort of things can we do here? And again, I looked at the policy here. Show recommendations for system updates, OS vulnerabilities, disk encryption, network security groups, WAF, firewalls, SQL, vulnerability assessment. Right, so it's a whole incident response process for protect, detect, and respond. Also, you can integrate this Power BI, do some really cool stuff graphically to display all that, and also it integrates with your SIEM products as well. And likewise, for the permissions and policies, you can leverage RBAC, role-based access control, to control that. I'm just going to click through these. So I just put a couple of quick questions on there. So the fastest way to deploy ADFS is Azure AD Connect, because it's 4 clicks. Right? Application and data storage access. Let's check time here. How many slides to go? I got 2 slides per minute now. So I made a chart up here with different types of data storage options. Exam-wise things I'm going to zoom in on for you that I'm going to say if I had to put a bet of stuff I really want to know about, and I actually have a slide come up here. So shared access signatures versus your storage key. So if I have a storage account, you have 2 storage account keys for the purpose of rotation, right? So if I change one, I still got one that's good. But also we have shared access signatures where I can grant, I need to pick on people. Where's your name? What's your name? Oh, yeah. So I can send him, I didn't catch it. So I can send him a URI that's time-bound, and he can access that storage for 5 minutes, and then it goes away. And that's what a shared access signature does. I think I got a picture of that. Real world, if you've never used Storage Explorer, I think they baked it in the portal now. Very, very cool graph, am I right? Yeah, I think I saw that recently. So it's a great way to graphically. Okay, so security options for storage. So on the right-hand side, you're seeing an example of built-in. So these are, what I did was I went to the subscription level just to take a snapshot of some of the built-in RBAC roles. And here we see storage account contributor. And of course, there would be a storage account reader, and then there would be a storage account owner. So we can leverage those by default. For data plane security, so this is a picture showing the 2 keys on the right for the storage account keys. And then also this, it's in the interface now. It's pretty cool. So I can say, what services do I want to allow? And of course, in a storage account, you have blobs, tables, queues, files. You have the type of resource type, whether it's container, object, or service. What are the permissions? When does it start? When does it expire? What's the allowed IP address? So I can really lock that down. And the type of protocols and the type of signing key. So that's all part of building up. It's a URI string that gets generated, which you then would send to someone else to access that storage temporarily. So we have encryption in transit and rest. I got a slide on this coming up on Azure Storage Service Encryption, so we'll come back to that. And we talked about disk encryption. And of course, you get storage analytics. That one got cut off, but CORS is a capability for storage. So what that essentially means is CORS is cross-origin resource sharing. So imagine you have a web app, but it has to access storage in a different domain in a blob somewhere else. It allows for that cross-communication across domains. Okay. And it is disabled by default, so you have to turn that on. So this was one of the exam objectives about Azure Storage Encryption. And again, I just took, sometimes the best thing is just look right at the interface here. Storage Service Encryption protects your data at rest, encrypts your data as it's written in our data centers, automatically decrypts it for you as you access it. Gee, it sounds like encrypted file system almost, right? Kind of like in the Active Directory. Key point here, this feature is only for Azure Blob Service. So that means it's not for files, not for tables, not for queues. Okay, it's only for the blob service within the storage account. Okay, and this was based on the chart, so I'm just going to click through this. You can test yourself later on. Just a couple of questions. Have a cute monkey picture. I love that. So designing applications, advanced applications. And I am not a developer. I'll say that right now. So I give it my best effort here. So high performance computing scenarios. Again, I would just know the scenarios. So I took these right off the Azure blogs or the docs out there. So the first one is big compute as a service, and the idea is here we have a group, we have a pool of virtual machines with a backend of a bunch of storage, and then we have batch service that takes that information bidirectionally between the web app and the client app to those pool of machines. Then you can also have HPC clusters in the cloud, and this is where you're leveraging VM scale sets. In the exam, sometimes they talk about VM sizes. He may have talked about that in the last session. I always tell people you don't want to try to memorize them all, but there's certain categories that are going to stand out. And one that really stands out a lot, man, I got something in my eye here, is A8 and A9 storage. So those have InfiniBand networking on them, and they're really, really fast on the network. So that's why they're used in this scenario. So you should know about those. And then there's also the third option, a scenario is on-premise HPC bursting to Azure. Again, so in this case, we are leveraging things like ExpressRoute or a VPN to go back and forth with our high-performance queuing between on-premises and the cloud. These are just a couple quick tables. I'm not going to read through these, but I got shortcuts for each of these. So stream analytics. So think about streaming data, really good for financial processing, real-time data, real-time fraud detection. Great for sensors and IoT. Azure Functions, we saw a whole session on it, pretty good. And of course, that's the whole serverless computing, AKA mainframe. It's kind of, you throw stuff up and process it. Did we just came full circle or what, right? That's what they're going. So we're going from IaaS to PaaS to SaaS to then functions, right? But the whole idea and the beauty about functions, why you like them for design, I don't want to touch, I don't want to own, I don't want to update OSs, I don't want to deal with machines anymore, right? I just want to deal with the code. When application developers love that, they don't have to go, may I please have another VM, please? No. Right? They just throw the code up there and it does its job. So really fast IoT, data processing, image processing, lots of things. Not for complex, though. You might want to do something more like Service Fabric and microservices. API apps. So a lot of companies have and love APIs, but it's like BYO API. Bring your own API. You can run these, supported with multiple languages. Authentication with public IDPs. ADAL, you should know what ADAL is, Active Directory Authentication Library. In the sessions here, would not be in the exam, but you'll probably hear MSAL. That's the new flavor, Microsoft Authentication Library. Vittorio, he was speaking earlier. He loves to talk about that stuff. Mobile apps, there's an SDK that you can integrate with this and also with Visual Studio. So I have a slide in this later on. So how you authenticate with Azure AD, I'm going to come back to that one because I got something I just updated. Diamond slide here again. So some more, there's a link here on design guidance. Whenever you're in any of these links and you see on this left-hand side design or plan, that's for this exam, right? So that's what you want to look for. Anything that's design or plan is good for here. We have different version approaches. You can not version your APIs. You can do URI, query string, or media type. So it's known as OAS. So if you see that, generally they don't put just acronyms in the exam, but they may state Open API Specification. But what they may not state is that this was formerly Swagger 2.0. So in the requirements, it may be we had developers that did Swagger 2.0. What should we do in the future? OK, it could be API apps because we support this. If we do the API management, and I didn't make this really clear, I apologize. I was going to do a management slide, didn't get to it. But that's what the built-in fault tolerance is all about. So if we use the API management, it will provide that by default, and also backup and restore capabilities. This is a total new slide. I've never had anything on this because I just totally didn't understand it, so I had to dig down and try to understand. But service bus relay is essentially messaging, right? And there's 3 different flavors that we have on here. And I made a link. And that's where I got all this goodness from. It's a great, great page. So first is you have one component and needs to talk to another. So it's a direct connection between 2 applications via the cloud. And it's going to leverage Windows Communication Foundation Server. Okay, so that's known as a service bus relay. Now, in contrast, you can have a service bus queue. And the key thing to notice, so the first one, this is what the main thing I think that you would need to understand. What's the difference between the 2 or the 3? Relay is 1-to-1, right? When we're looking at a queue, you notice it's many to 1. So you have multiple different components: a web app, a mobile app, service, maybe it's IoT, maybe it's functions. And then the receiver is a single service or application. And that's the queue. And then the third one, which is right here, is where you have a topic. And a topic is many to many. Now, the key operative word I put in here, again, from, because a lot of times they'll say, what's the easiest, what's the best? It all depends on what people say. But my favorite word, it's not automagic. So if we're doing queues or topics, those don't happen automatically, where service relay will. And how does the service relay do it? It actually stores that relay string in a registry setting, so it can remember it. Web jobs, I did have this a long time ago. I thought I'd bring it back, though. So it's part of Azure App Service. So this is just running stuff in the background, right? And what are the options we do? So all those different extensions, commands, BAT, Node.js, PHP, all sorts of things. So you upload the exe or script. You can develop these with an SDK. There's 2 types, continuous or looped. And it can be triggered, manual, or scheduled. So Azure ADDS, so Azure Domain Join Services. So this is a conversation I have with customers a lot, and it's kind of confusing. Okay, I got domain servers on the cloud. Then I got Azure AD, and then now I got Azure ADDS. So what's the difference? Okay, remember we talked about the difference between AD versus Azure AD. Well, let's say if you're a brand new upstart company and you don't have an AD, you're just going all in the cloud, right? But then you got applications and they're Kerberos and they're LDAP. Well, we can't use that with Azure AD. So what this does, this is a managed service with a pair of domain controllers in the cloud and can do Kerberos and can do NTLM and can do LDAP. So it's still, I would say it's an evolving story. It's relatively new. We have users and computers OU, but not much else. It's pretty flat. You don't have enterprise admin rights in it. So there's no EA, there's no domain admin. It's all fully managed for you. Okay. So what would you use this for? So again, I'm an upstart. I got a new small company. I could do Azure AD Join. So you can join your Windows 10 machines through Azure AD for education, for retail business, for mobile device management. Okay. Anyone seen this building? That was the coolest thing on my trip. Have you seen that building? It's the pool on top. It's in Singapore. That is like so cool. They call it the infinite pool. So, design Azure web and mobile apps. So the idea here is we have Azure App Service. Azure App Service is kind of a container of multiple things, being mobile apps, API apps, logic apps, and web apps. That we can do all these things together. So this slide, I kind of updated just this little graphic here really quickly, Because I always tell people, I throw these graphics, I don't intend you to memorize everything, but want to know kind of the best and most important things. So within an app service plan that contains all these things, what stands out? Well, okay, so from basic, so when I get beyond free and shared, from basic on, I get unlimited limits. The app service environment, ASE, which I'll talk about coming up, we only get in premium. And that's a big question for people. I don't understand this app service environment. Well, it's nothing but an app service plan, premium, and then you get it. And I got some more stuff about that. SLA also, so this could be a requirements from an architectural design in the exam. We need an SLA, how good do you need? So we got 99.9 or 99.95 in the last two. So that's why I highlighted those for you. So app service environment, so this is the premium plan. The idea is if you've ever deployed this and you do an app service, and just a regular plan, it doesn't take that long, it's a few minutes. You do this, it's hours. Right? And why? Because it's not a managed service out in the cloud. This gets thrown in your VNet. And why would you want that? Because some people want to put the NSGs and the UDRs and lock it down a little bit more. So there's a new term they're using, they probably use it here at Ignite because they did it internally. They're calling these injection services. So we're taking something that was out in PaaS, and now we're going to drop it down in your VNet. You're going to see more and more of this. The other flip side of that, just real world, is they called it tunneling. Now it's called private access. So you want to go from your VNet securely up to SQL services. And so they're working at Secure Pass for that. So that's kind of the new things they're talking about here. So it's injected into your VNet. You'll get the ILB support, your UDRs, your NSGs, all that sort of stuff. And then what this picture is showing, which is kind of another design scenario, where you can actually, it's also possibly to connect one ASE to another one. So we have inbound traffic to a public VIP on the left-hand side, and then that actually goes through the cloud and then connects to the public interface to another app service environment. So just a design possibility. Okay. Push notification services within mobile apps. So that's registered within WNS or Windows Notification, which is Microsoft Push Notification Services. Some basic components. So we have notification hubs. We have tags to subscribe for users from different categories. There's a template. Tags can also be used for like English versus French. And of course, push notifications. We all know and love those because we have them on our mobile phone. And that's where we get broadcasts that are sent to our phones about, like this event, right? We get these all the time. This was totally new. I never had this one before. It was kind of interesting. It was a tagline in the exam objectives about offline sync capabilities. So essentially what this means is, what if I can't be connected to the internet? Can this app still work? So we can have a little local database here, right? So it saves it to a local store. And then we can sync it to the mobile app backend once we're online. So the benefits are, if we have bad network, like here with 5 million users accessing this, we'll still have good performance because it will use that local cache database on my device. So if you have network issues or no access, it's a good use case for this. On the synchronization, notice at the bottom there, so this could be valuable information, is that the backend server uses a push service where the local store uses a pull service to it. Another one I never had before, so there's a new diamond slide also, as far as custom code options, what you can do. Some things, and I got a link on this here about querying a backend table. You can filter and sort the information. You can specify certain columns or rows. The data, you can concatenate, basically kind of slice and dice that information any way you want if you do custom code on the back end of those mobile applications. And this is the one I was talking about before, so I'm just going to click through the animation here. So if you create and register an application with Azure Active Directory, there's a basic process. And what I did was I highlighted the things that I think are important to know here. Let me zoom in right here. So when you create a new Azure AD app, you see on the right-hand side, you have to know the client ID. You have to have the issuer URL. And then also, you have to grant graph permissions. So there's with each application, there's actually a service principal tied to that, and then there's application permissions for Azure Active Directory, which you can get very specific about reads, writes, and modifies, and all that kind of stuff. Okay, just a couple quick slides here. I'm checking my time here, so we're doing pretty good. Got to know a little bit about OMS, so I'm going to leave this picture, but we know it's the magic tool, right? They talk about it all the time. But the whole point is, and the point in this slide here is it integrates for automation, for queries, for events, for updates across Azure, across Amazon Web Services, as well as private clouds, including like Azure Stack. Of course, Azure Stack, they didn't know about when they wrote those exams, so it wouldn't be there. But this is a new slide I wrote about automating tasks, because this is a specific line item called out in the exam objectives. So some key prerequisites: you have to have automation DSC. We'll talk about that in a second. Hybrid runbook worker is something you add later on, but really the key thing is the automation account. Now, if you haven't seen this, and I actually was like trying to demo this recently, and when you go to the marketplace, if you actually select automation and control, it will create both of these. So it will create the automation account for you and the OMS workspace and tie those two automatically together for you. So it's pretty nifty. And then what I did here is, and this is a great graphic you can look at and study a little bit more. But what I think is important for an architectural exam is, what are the scenarios, when and why I'd want to use this? Well, here's some good things. We can update AWS VMs. We can remediate alerts based on actions. We can remove resource groups. We can do source control, runbook from an alert trigger, ARM templates. So this is kind of an architectural design pattern of how this works with the OMS workspace, the Azure automation, and the hybrid runbook workers. So you want to check out that link, Azure/automation. Application insights. So what can we monitor? All sorts of things, different types of languages, programming capabilities, shown a sample dashboard there. And this is all part of a DevOps cycle for detecting, triage, diagnose performance failures and usage. For Azure Site Recovery, and again, we internally call it ASR a lot, but no, the product group doesn't like that, so it's Azure Site Recovery. But essentially, this is for multiple infrastructures. So what this picture is showing you is you can go from Hyper-V to Hyper-V, Hyper-V to Azure, VMware to VMware, VMware to Microsoft Azure. So the great part, too, is if you ever played with this, you can actually do a test trial and test out that application before you actually move it. So it's a really good solution for backup recovery and even moving your workloads. This is about all you need to know on this. You don't need to be a chef, a puppet, or an octopus expert or whatever, but it's about some other automation use cases. So we talked a little bit about Azure Automation, which is a platform service that runs in the cloud. A lot of people go, I was just doing a simple hello world. Why did it take 10 minutes? Oh, because you're in a queue of 20,000 other people, because it's a service, right, that runs out there. But if we use Azure Automation, we can import runbooks, and pretty much anything that we can call and do with that, with our scripting, will work. Or a lot of people go, we've been using Chef for 20 years or 10 years or whatever, right? Well, you can use that too as well. Oh, we got Puppet. We got Chef recipes. You can go grab those from all over the place. You can use those. Or you can take Azure Automation and tie it together with desired state configuration. So one of the things I talk to my customers about is inside the box versus outside the box, right? So outside the box is everything in the Azure portal, right? Inside the box is once you've logged in. So if I'm going to deploy resources outside the box, we're going to use Azure Automation. We use PowerShell. We can use Azure CLI. We can use ARM templates. But now I got a bunch of servers that I need to configure for ADFS. How do I do that? Oh, now I need these other things. I need DSC, desired state configuration, which will make those changes inside the box. Now, a little thing that you may have heard in the last session, I will not be able to do any of that if I'm running an ARM template script and I don't have a VM extension for scripts enabled. Because you have to have the VM script extension to then allow the script to inject and run on your behalf to update and add those roles and components to it. OK, last section. We're almost there, folks. So this last section really is about ARM and Azure Resource Manager. So this is kind of an update from last Ignite. I think I only had one slide at last Ignite on this. So resource groups, like organizational units, have a purpose. And organizational units in Active Directory, it's GPOs and delegation. We said we don't have GPOs here, so I can't put GPOs on resource groups. But a resource group is simply a container, right? And what you should think about, real world and exam world, is why I use resource groups. So think about your application deployment. How do we deploy our applications, right? Because if I take an ARM template, I have to deploy that into a resource group. So if I'm going to deploy all those components of the application together with it, I want them to likewise go in that same resource group. So anything that shares the same life cycle you want to have in there. You can scope RBAC, role-based access control. What I mean by scope, there's 3 levels where we're going to apply role-based access control: the entire subscription, a resource group within, or a resource within the Azure resource group. So I can put those built-in RBAC roles anywhere. An Azure resource can only live in one resource group. So if I put a VM in Mark's resource group at Ignite, I cannot have that VM live anywhere else. Okay? 2 links there for you also to read. ARM templates. So if you're not using these, I was a PowerShell guy, and I still am. And when I first started doing Azure, I did everything in PowerShell, and I kind of fought it for a while. And now I'm like, I'm just going to figure it out. And once I did, I was like, okay, bye-bye PowerShell. I'm not doing that anymore. Because there's so many templates out there. It's like chef recipes. They're everywhere, right? Okay, so different strategies. This link here really is more real world, but definitely a good read. ARM World-Class Templates, Proven Practices. This was written by the CAT team, the Customer Advisory Team. It's 2 years old, but it's still the guideline for how to deploy and create ARM resource templates. So this is kind of a walkthrough here. You can actually do a template deployment in the portal. And in here you see the various components. So your template has a schema that's based on with versioning. And then you can define your parameters and your resources and variables. You can, from the portal, you can select templates for virtual machines, web apps, whatever, and then edit those. And you can edit them directly in the portal. You can edit them directly in any JSON editor, which Visual Studio does very nicely, particularly with the SDK. And then you can deploy these from the portal itself. And these are just some samples. You're not going to have to write these or anything, but you should know what ARM templates are and do. PowerShell and Azure CLI both are game on these exams. Okay, PowerShell, and if you're not an Azure CLI, I wasn't before until a certain customer got me into Azure CLI. Right there. So I gave a couple examples here of template PowerShell and another example. And one of the simple things, just really high level, is when you do a PowerShell, you always have the dashes, but the CLI works almost like what I used to do Cisco. It's like, noun, verb, just there's no the dashes, very few dashes in there. It's very simple. It's actually easier. Okay. These are some things, some broad, one I wanted to point out about these, and this is how I study on the plane and I get ready. So you go to like all those links, and then if you ever notice this, when you go down to the left-hand side, it says PDF. It will download that whole thing. And then what I do is I look for the exam objectives, and then I search that word or phrase. That's how I got all this stuff, right? So I did the homework for you. So here's some links. It's not all of them, but those are a bunch of them I did. So again, we took the exam objectives, we broke them down. I broke them down the slides. I have links. What's my website? What's it called? aka.ms/azure/learn. aka.ms/azure/learn. I will post the slides here in the next 15 minutes. They will be up there. So I am out of slides. I'm out of time, and I thank you very much.